Hey there, it's me. I'm Nick Roush. That's our friend Connor O'Gara. This is 11 personnel, no huddle. Doing a little something different this offseason. You hear me and Luckett talk for an hour about Kentucky football. You'll probably get tired of seeing our faces. So we're going to chat with some of our friends about what's going on, some quick chats, catching up, see what they think is going on, how everything's happening. And we're starting with the guy who we usually finish with at SEC Media Days. Usually it's me and Connor, very tired. Don't have our brain, like the synapses aren't firing, usually having a weird conversation at the end of media days. Mark Stoops got really weird at the end of this one, so we didn't have time to catch up this year. Mark Stoops no longer the coach at Kentucky. I want to get to that, of course, but first, you're a national champion. How does it feel?
It's surreal. And I've said that a million times. It's kind of been an out-of-body experience. I mean, just like thinking about what Indiana football was during my 4 years there. And I went to Indiana from 2008 to 2012. Last season was 2011. And in my 4 years, they were 13-35. They did not go to a bowl game. I covered probably the most important Indiana football game during my 4 years there when they beat Purdue in overtime to get to 5 wins. And then they fired Bill Lynch a day later because it wasn't particularly cutting the mustard. And then, experienced just nothing but apathy for the longest time. And I've said this before, but when people used to find out what I did, they would say, well, who's your team? And I'd say, well, I went to Indiana. We didn't have a football team. So I can be unbiased. I'm a neutral party. And, obviously seeing my school do what it did, it brought me immense pride because I don't pretend to be an Indiana football fan. Like I won't say that I've had bad days as a result of Indiana football, because when you've been as bad as Indiana has been for so long, they can't hurt you.
Right. That's the expectation, is for them to lose.
So being able to experience this run in a sport that is the ultimate haves versus the have-nots, first time national champ since 1996 Florida, and to have all of this happen is just like beyond my wildest dreams, because everything that I've ever covered in this sport has told me this isn't how this works. Mm-hmm. This is a fun story. Fun stories don't win national championships. Fun stories get fan bases engaged, and maybe they're going to get engaged for like 2 to 3 months. But then when the big boys come to play, the nice stories move to the back burner. And this was just not that. So being there in Miami to see all this play out, man, it's something that I'll be able to hold on to for the rest of my life.
So I've had a couple moments covering my favorite team where I couldn't believe it, and my body just like shakes because you're just so no cheering in the press box, right? You kind of bottle it up. And I remember when Kentucky snapped the streak at Florida in 2018, I was so sore the following day from being so tense. So as you're down there, you're being an objective media member covering it for Saturday Down South. How are you just compartmentalizing, internalizing? Like what's the roller coaster of emotions being there at Hard Rock?
In some ways it was extremely difficult, and in some ways it was easier. Because it's like the whole fourth quarter, my lower half was numb, just numb. Never experienced that before. I've never really had to worry about that. Ironically enough, the only time I've ever had like true emotional investment where I thought it's so hard to not be cheering right now were 2011, 2012 season, Indiana basketball against Kentucky, the watch shot, and then the Sweet 16 being there. Those are the only 2 times where I've really had to like dial it back in the press box, because like for the most part, like you can be invested in a scene, and have like emotions that are impacting like how you're watching a game, but to be like is emotionally invested in results that are playing out, it's an entirely different story that I've never really had to deal with. So I was in Miami, I was sitting in like the back row of the press box, and in front of me, and so we're in the southwest corner and we're in the Miami corner. So like Indiana fans had them outnumbered. Let's not mistake that. It was 65-35, I thought. So we're in the Miami corner, and I have the Miami creative team and one of the Miami PR people that are in the row like directly ahead of me. So the weird thing is when something good would happen for IU, there wasn't that reaction in my surroundings. And when the press box is closed off like that, you don't get a true sense of like the emotion that
Right.
goes into it. So I'm kind of having to like self-stymie and like react in a different sort of way mentally, when I know full well when Fernando Mendoza has that 4th and 5 run, everything inside of me is saying, oh my God, this is happening. I can't believe this moment just played out. And when that interception plays out to be able to close the game, it's one of the hardest experiences I've ever had in this field, of like trying to contain my emotions and then getting onto the field afterwards and being able to look around, and there's tens of thousands of Indiana fans. Like I joked afterwards, looking at my social media feeds, I think every person I ever met at Indiana was at this game. I really think that. And for a program that just had like smatterings of crowds during my entire 4 years there, it's just totally different. So like I was like getting emotional afterwards, and I was just looking around talking to media members like, man, how about this? Like what world is this that we're living in? It still doesn't even feel real.
Well, and that's what makes football great, right? Especially when you're winning, how it can bring everyone together. I'm sure you saw people you hadn't seen in forever, and talking to people you hadn't seen and talked to in forever. I mean, it's a feeling that is unlike any other. I always say that the most intoxicating drug in the world is winning on the road, because it's almost like you against the world. And I'm sure that had somewhat of a similar feel. I know to get to Kentucky, there's probably some Kentucky fans who are like, oh, man, if Indiana can do this, maybe Kentucky can. Before we get to Will Stein, were you shocked that Kentucky actually pulled the trigger and let go of Mark Stoops after that 5-7 season?
I wasn't shocked, but I wouldn't have bet my life on it. I think we've had many a conversation on air and off air about the Mitch Barnhart dynamic. There's a certain bit of loyalty, the fact that Mark Stoops was not going to resign, because when you have all that money due within 60 days, and obviously he was willing to make the changes in his contract to that, you don't have any reason to step aside with a job that you still feel like you're capable of doing. So I think all of those dynamics made it really unique, and it's the winningest coach in program history. But when there was ultimately the end of season results of just being run off the field, I think we all saw it. I think we all saw, look, this has run its course. You get to have a couple of, despite what Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, and Kirby Smart say in their group texts, losing 3 games does not get you fired. Mark Stoops, yes, was the winningest coach in program history. He had 4 consecutive disappointing seasons. He had clearly lost his edge. The Zach Calzada thing is one of the biggest travesties that'll ever happen in the NIL era. And to think about the way that played out, it was an indictment of him as a head coach. And while he did great things there and deserves to be celebrated for those great things, sometimes things run their course. And it's okay that things run their course. And we have to be able to kind of pick up the pieces and move on. And so to go from having the longest tenured head coach in the SEC to going to a guy in Will Stein, who would have been my grade in school, is such a weird thing to process.
Yeah, it
like
really is.
I'm 35 years old. Like I was born in 1990, and to think like, oh, that's the new Kentucky head coach. That in itself is kind of stunning to process, and it's going to take some getting used to seeing him on the sideline.
It certainly is. And, you mentioned Calzada. I know, Garrett, get your money right. That kind of it became kind of a joke, a rallying cry. But it really is an indictment on Stoops' biggest flaw as a head coach. He became the winningest head coach without ever having a quarterback. I mean, had a good Will Levis year. Terry Wilson and Steven Johnson had some fine times. But he did it all without a quarterback. So what Kentucky did, they went out and got a guy who's pretty good with quarterbacks. Is Will Stein is viewed as like, here we're like, oh man, this is great, right? Like, hell yeah, this is going to be awesome. From a different perspective, how do you view the addition of Will Stein? How do you when you did your gradings? Because I'm sure you had to grade some guys, right, for Saturday on South, your coaching hires. How did you assess the Will Stein hire and where he stacks up with some of the other hires made in the SEC?
I loved it because I wasn't sure that Kentucky would be willing to go in that direction. I thought, and I actually, looking back on it, I was mad that I didn't necessarily process his local ties to the area. Otherwise, I would have had him as an obvious candidate. And I think everybody was so just hung up on the Summerall thing and the way that played out. So it kind of maybe blinded some of that that perspective. But I think Will Stein and the job that he's done at Oregon, if you think that was all Oregon, man, I think you're looking at it all wrong, because he takes over a situation with Kenny Dillingham and has obviously some great resources to be able to work with. And everybody kind of assumes, well, Oregon just has their pick of the litter. But the part of it that's underrated is that look at all those three quarterbacks that he's going to be known for in Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, Dante Moore. Those were all guys who came to him with questions about their game. And I think Bo Nix is the guy that we look back on and say, well, you know what? He was a former 5-star guy. He at least did some things at Auburn. Bo Nix needed to be rebuilt at Oregon. And it wasn't just the scheme that set him up for success. Like, there were decision-making things that he needed to figure out with Will Stein that allowed him to ultimately become one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He's one of the best quarterbacks in college football of the 2020s. And ultimately, it's why he was able to go in the first round and become an immediate impact type guy for the Denver Broncos. But like the Dylan Gabriel thing, all right, he was going to put up big numbers. How about Dante Moore? Because he was not a made man. He was a guy that came in as a freshman that said, look, I know I got these reps at UCLA. I feel like I'm not ready for this yet. I feel like there are things that I need to figure out. And yes, he's still in college football. And so, you know, that process isn't done. He's not considered a finished product, but had he gone to the NFL, he'd been considered a number 2 pick. And he was a guy that led him to the semifinals and looked really good doing so. He just didn't look as good as Fernando Mendoza. So I'm a believer in what he's been able to do. And I think schematically speaking, he's exactly what Kentucky could have hoped for in a post Bush Hamden world, whatever that is. And I just think that like the job that he did with 3 different guys, not just one guy, but 3 different guys with very different skill sets at different places in their careers, it made me a Will Stein believer. And I said, whoever is going to get him is going to feel very fortunate.
The part that I'm glad you mentioned, like, Bo Nix was, I don't want to say a train wreck, but he represented everything there is about Auburn football, right? Like, it was a freaking roller coaster ride. And so for Stein to be able to make that work at Oregon is definitely impressive. But how, obviously, I don't think you have every single transfer portal update for every single SEC team off the front of the dome, but it gets Kenny Minchie. And, you know, but there's a tough schedule ahead. So, like, how quick can you potentially suspect what's this turnaround look like? Or can it be quick, or does it have to be a slow build? What say you?
If we're going to bring it back to Indiana terms, year one's proof of concept. It's show that you have processes that work. It doesn't mean that you have to be this juggernaut and you have to flip this unbelievable switch. And I think Indiana benefited from obviously a really favorable schedule year one, like no doubt about it. They were probably like a 9-3 team that masqueraded as an 11-1 team that got into the college football playoff. Like I could fully admit that. But what I think was established year one was that people saw the proof of concept with how Cignetti evaluates talent, how they operate their practices, which they do in a very modern, nuanced way. And what does it look like to have guys in that building who know his processes, who can respond to it and say, this works, guys. Like, we need to be able to buy into this. That, I think, is so important for Will Stein year one. They spent money in a way that I didn't know that they were going to be able to. The offensive line overhaul is obviously going to be a big topic of discussion. You knew you had to rebuild the entire Big Blue Wall. You knew that you were going to need to get some new skill players in there. I think CJ Baxter, if he can stay healthy, is so intriguing. I've loved him. He was a kid that came out of Orlando as a 5-star guy, had over 100 scrimmage yards as a true freshman, as an 18-year-old in a college football playoff game, and was somebody that was coming into not the 2025 season, but the 2024 season. I predicted him to lead the SEC in rushing. Like, I thought he was set up for a lot of success. So there's a guy that if he gets into the right scheme and if they view him as the guy that they can kind of build that ground game around, then all of a sudden you have a real playmaker there if he can stay healthy. And to me, it's all about showing Will Stein, not that he's going to be able to assume that he's going to have Oregon level talent in that door, but show that it wasn't just the byproduct of having 5-star classes, both at the high school and transfer portal levels. So doing that and seeing a multi-win improvement is really important for this team, showing that there is true buy-in, showing that the Kenny Minchie thing, while it's kind of an enigma, the way that it's played out so far, showing that your scouting and your evaluation of him was all founded in the right places. And like you can actually build an offense around this guy. So that's a lot of boxes to check year one, and notice that none of those are really defensive boxes to check year one. We'll see how that plays out.
Oh, yeah.
But I do think that that's something that's realistic for Kentucky. And then all of a sudden year two, we're having those different conversations. And if the P word gets thrown around, that will be a sign that that the Will Stein experiment has got off on the right foot.
Well, and to go back, I mean, you mentioned Summerall earlier. There is I'm a big John Summerall guy. Loved him when he's at Kentucky. He's a great ball coach. Like, all that dude does is go to conference championship games. But having an offensive guy, it's such a newness that we're not used to here. And so, just from a matter of putting up points, like there's going to be some challenging games, but as long as you're not getting run off the field, they were getting run off like in the way that they were, it can make Kentucky fans feel so much different about it. And then the other part of it too, Connor, is how this works, right? Like, you think what a team is, and then a schedule opens up because this team fell off a cliff, right? Like, I don't think going into the season, Auburn was the ultimate seesaw. They were either going to be playoff good or as bad as they were. And so it would change how you looked at the schedule. So before we let you go, my final question for you, is there a team that when you're watching all this portal stuff unfold around the SEC, that you're like, I don't know if they're checking all the right boxes here. I'm a little worried about which direction this is going.
Bama's the one, because I've been a Kalen DeBoer defender. Guy was at Indiana in 2019. I hate, just a crazy thing to process. I hate I thought the laziest take ever when he was hired was like, he's not a Southern guy. He doesn't have this background. It's not going to work. It's like, all right, well, Will Muschamp was the most Southern guy ever. And how'd that work out? It's like, miss me with all that stuff. But what I think has been a little bit troubling to see play out is that they had 3 games this past year in which they were non-competitive. No answers whatsoever. Ryan Grubb was brought in as the troubleshooter, the guy that was supposed to fix that team in game in ways that Kalen DeBoer could not without his right-hand man. So what does Bama do this year? Well, it has some great moments. Gets to the SEC championship, gets to the college football playoff, has a historic comeback on the road against Oklahoma. They win some big-time games. They beat Georgia in the regular season at night. They hadn't lost at home at night since 2009 Kentucky. How about that? And then still, the end of season plays out, and you look up, and they got to replace everybody in the trenches. They have their worst ground game in program history. They had a worse running attack than they had in 1955, 3 years before Bear Bryant left Kentucky for Alabama, and they were 0-10 that season. They had a worse ground game than that, which is just somehow impossible. And they had no sort of creativity in that area. And then you watch the Seattle Seahawks go to the Super Bowl immediately after they replaced Ryan Grubb, Clint Kubiak, who all of a sudden finds the right ingredients in this ground game, top 10 ground game in the NFL. And yes, Sam Darnold, the transition from him, Geno Smith, and that transition.
Right. But still,
But one and done with Ryan Grubb. They went 10-7, and a first-year head coach, Mike McDonald, said, "You're kind of the problem. We need to go in a different direction." And so instead, he goes to Alabama. And if Alabama's offense had been a juggernaut, all right, fine. But they had too many of those games in which they were non-competitive. And now I'm looking at Bama going, man, I'm not really crazy about the offensive line overhaul. They didn't go out and get established guys. They got guys that are more projects. And I'm kind of looking at them going, they're not preseason top 10. They're not even preseason top 10 for year 3. And I have way more questions than answers. Like, their secondary should be really, really good. Everything else I'm looking at going, I don't know. Keelan Russell could be awesome. I don't know. They could have one of the worst offensive lines in the SEC, and we won't know until it plays out. Their backfield didn't get any better. They got Hollywood Smothers poached by Texas, even though it looked like they had him in the portal. So I got all these questions about Bama in ways that I'm not used to having. They're going to be outside of the top 10, I think, in the preseason poll for the first time since 2008. And I'm looking at them going, man, I feel way different about them than I expected to going into year 3.
And Bama comes to Kentucky week 2. Will Stein's first SEC game.
How about
it? Could be something.
Maybe I should be there for that one.
Connor O'Gara, you know him, you love him. Follow him on Twitter at CJO.
CJ O'Gara. You got it.
Yeah, there we go.
Got it.
I was
You're
getting
on money.
0 and 0. It was all mixed up. The SDS podcast is great. He's got a lot of great guests on there. And his long lost stepbrother might win Coach of the Year. Jacksonville Jaguars, maybe.
We'll see. It's a good year one. I'm a Bears fan, so I'm kind of hoping Ben Johnson still wins it. But if Liam won it, that'd be pretty impressive.
You get half credit for that if that
I'll
happens.
take it.
So, Connor, thank you so much for hanging out with us, talking us a little ball today with 11 personnel, no huddle.